So the BERDO Review Board does not currently have an appointed chair. So I will leave us in a vote for acting chair. Does anyone on the review board want to make a nomination for acting chair for today's session?
I nominate Lee Matsueda as acting chair.
Thank you, Board Member O'Malley. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Board Member Jacobs. I'll do now a vote. So how do you vote, Board Member Boyd? Or sorry, Board Member Boyd is not with us today. How do you vote, Board Member Ellis?
Aye.
Board Member Jacobs?
Aye.
Board Member Lattimore?
Aye.
Board Member Matsueda?
Aye.
And Board Member Nelson?
In favor?
And Board Member O'Malley?
Aye.
Great. I will now hand the meeting over to Board Member Matsueda, and I'll start sharing my screen.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. Nice to see fellow board members here. So I am calling this public meeting to order at 4:34 p.m. In accordance with the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance regulations adopted pursuant to the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance, Boston City Code Ordinances, Section 7-2.2. The BERDO Review Board will hold a virtual public hearing at 4:30 p.m. on February 26 to review the following topics in regards to the reduction of greenhouse gases from the building, energy production, and consumption so as to promote the public health and welfare of Boston residents. In accordance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, we are conducting this public meeting online to ensure the public access to the deliberations of the BERDO Review Board. The public may access this call through telephone and video conferencing. Members of the public will have an opportunity to ask questions and provide public comment. To do so, you can please raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. And if you're calling in and you cannot use the platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. And you can also send your questions to staff via email at berdoreviewboard@boston.gov. So for the record, I am Lee Matsueda, acting chair of the board. I'll now conduct a roll call of board members. Board members, please say your name in the order that they appear on the slide.
Stephen Ellis.
Board member Jacobs, I know you're with us. Are you there?
Screen is frozen. Lavette Jacobs.
Gail Lattimore.
Lee Matsueda.
Jack Nelson.
Sorry, Matt O'Malley. And apologies, folks. I'm in a hotel with spotty Wi-Fi, so I'm going to keep my camera off, but I am here. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. And now we will have staff introduce themselves.
Diana Vasquez with the Environment Department.
Hannah Payne, Director of Carbon Neutrality in the Environment Department.
Fantastic. And I know we have other staff that aren't joining us. We have a great team of folks, but great to have Hannah and Diana with us. All right, so here's our agenda for today's meeting. We're going to start with the approval of meeting minutes, as we often or usually do. Next, the city team is going to demonstrate, well, I guess we're going to have an update and discussion on BERDO implementation. We'll discuss the Equitable Emissions and Investment Fund, pick up from that last conversation from our last meeting. We have some administrative updates, and of course, we will then end with a meeting adjournment. Are there any just questions about the agenda before we go on from our board members? Okay. Hearing none, we're going to go to our first agenda item, which is to approve our meeting minutes from the February 12th meeting. Before we take a vote, are there any questions or comments from board members regarding our meeting minutes? Okay. Hearing none, is there a motion to approve our minutes?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Board Member Nelson. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. And so on the motion to approve the board meeting minutes, board members in favor, please say aye or show your hands. Raise your hands. Aye.
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 Are there any board members that abstain? Any board members opposed? Okay. So board meeting minutes have been approved, and we will make sure to post those online so that members of the public can see that from our February 12th meeting. Thanks, everyone. All right, so let's move on to our second agenda item. We're gonna have an update now on BERDO implementation. I think I'm passing it off to you, Hannah.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just want to give a few updates on our reporting season. We have officially opened and launched 2024 BERDO reporting. So that is for 2023 annual energy and water use that building owners have to report. So the big update we made last week was updating our BERDO reporting form, which is BERDO data is reported primarily through Energy Star Portfolio Manager, but we also have a separate BERDO reporting form that captures additional information that Portfolio Manager does not capture that we need for BERDO. So that has been updated with 2024 information. We've added a few questions around planning for emissions compliance and updated some of our questions on renewable energy to try to improve our process for renewable energy reporting. Building owners got letters went out to all building owners earlier this last week. They went out last week, so they should have gotten those letters in the mail. This week we are sending emails to all account holders through the BERDO reporting form that we have email addresses for, also with the information on reporting to make sure everyone is aware of the May 15th deadline and the reporting procedures. Though it will very much look similar, if for folks who have been doing this for the last several years, or even in BERDO 1.0, the process is very familiar at this point. If it is a building's first year of BERDO reporting, they'll have to do the third-party verification. We have only there's a small number of new BERDO buildings that are covered this year as their first year, and they might have been added because it was a newly constructed building or a reassessment identified that they meet the BERDO thresholds. We always update the covered buildings list every year to adjust for those changes that happen through the assessing. Also sharing again, I think we've already shared with this board that we have an opportunity to provide free reporting and verification services to a select number of building owners. We have a second round of applications open until March 15th, and we'll review the applications again that we've received by that date. Again, and we'll continue to open cohorts as we have funding available, but we're prioritizing under-resourced building owners who have additional challenges in completing the reporting. So really trying to prioritize folks who speak a language other than English as their primary language, who have limited access or to computer skills, and or are located in environmental justice neighborhoods. So sharing that application link out again, because we want to make sure it's getting to folks. So that is the brief update on the reporting process. We've kicked off our working groups. We had a commercial real estate working group meeting and our first healthcare institutions connected to district systems working group meetings now. And we have scheduled those next, the second meetings for each of those working groups. The commercial real estate group will meet again on March 20th at 12 p.m. And we've shared the meeting minutes and a slide deck from the first meeting on the review board website. The healthcare institutions connected to district systems are really eager to meet more frequently, so they will be meeting on March 6th. So just 2 weeks after their first meeting at 3 p.m. And we are working with the chairs of each of those working groups to set agendas for those meetings. And really the purpose is for those members to drive the agendas and share feedback with to kind of discuss amongst themselves what feedback they want to be bringing to the review board and staff related to BERDO. So I think some of the focus will be in each of the groups will be around flexibility measures, but other topics may be covered as well. And then just a couple review board updates. As you know, there are a couple open seats on the BERDO review board with the new council committees being assigned. The Councilor Coletta will be the new BERDO review board member from the city council. And we're scheduled to do onboarding with her in early March, so should be joining BERDO review board meeting starting in March. And then we also have a opening to fill a seat for the one other seat that has to be nominated by a qualified community-based organization. So those community-based organizations that are qualified under the BERDO process have all been notified that they can submit a nomination, and we are closing those nominations on March 6th. So really encourage those organizations to get in nominations as soon as possible. And as a reminder, this is the list of qualified community-based organizations that are eligible to nominate to the BERDO review board. And that is a very quick little update of some of the things that are going on. Happy to answer questions from the board.
Great. Thanks so much, Hannah. Appreciate that. Yeah, so I'll lead us through a round of board Q&A. And I'll just start with you, Board Member Ellis. Any comments or questions that you have?
All right, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Hannah, for that update. Just to make sure that I heard correctly, you stated that there were new and updated questions related to renewable energy, and what was the second part? I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yes, we added a few questions related to the emissions compliance. So mostly just having building owners kind of review how we determine whether you have to meet your first year of emissions compliance in 2025 or in 2030, and making sure that building owners are aware of that upcoming emissions compliance year.
Okay, and what kind of new questions were you asking related to renewable energy, just out of curiosity?
Really cleaning up the questions that we had asked previously, editing them slightly. There aren't tons of new changes. We're asking for, I don't have them off the top of my head, but just cleaning up some of the questions. And also we are asking for some additional information if it's, again, not required, but we are working on how we're going to match the Boston Community Choice electricity data. And so we're asking for some account information for common accounts that we could use to match that better and verify that process that we're establishing for connecting that data.
Okay, thank you. And my last comment or sort of question, if it's possible to share a template of the questions that are being asked. I know I've done reporting in the past, so more so related to renewable energy. I am curious about those questions, especially as we're developing what the verification process is going to look like. I may have some words and thoughts on that as that comes along. So if you can, I think this is directed to Diana specifically. If you can just share me sort of like a template of what are those questions that you're asking, that'll be helpful for me as I'm planning for the future.
Yeah, definitely. And I believe we've shared a PDF version as well of all the questions, and we can follow up to see if we can add that to the existing form just so that people can see all the questions up front.
Thank you. That's all for now.
All right, thanks, Board Member Ellis. Board Member Jacobs?
No questions at the moment.
Very good. Board Member Lattimore?
Yes, thanks for the information. I do have one question, and that is about nominations. I was just curious if you could say how many, if any, you've received so far for from the community-based organizations.
Diana, I believe we've received one nomination so far.
Correct. Yes, we have received Reclaim Roxbury's nomination. So one formal nomination, but we've received also questions from different CBOs who are interested in either coordinating or had some ideas for some meetings.
Yeah, thank you. I have outreach to a couple of people, but one of them unfortunately did not live in Boston, which is one of the requirements. And the others I'm waiting to hear back, but thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Lattimore. I think I'll have a few just comments and questions. Maybe one thing that would be helpful is just to remind me, so we have these working group meetings that have been going on. Can you just remind me, have there been other working groups that have met? And what, again, is the process if there's a group or, that's interested in joining one of these work groups?
Yeah, so these work groups were established. The Hospitals Connected to District Systems Working Group was actually named in the ordinance, and the Commercial Real Estate Group that was requested and came about through the regulations process. They are there. Those groups were created because there was interest of those sectors to have a space to really, share their specific challenges and ideas related to BERDO and be able to like share those with the review board. So that's how those came about. We could certainly consider having other working groups. One of the requirements is that they have to be public meetings. And this is also not the only way that we engage with different sectors from BERDO. So our staff also is like meeting with other, affordable housing, or we've had some meetings with cultural institutions about their BERDO compliance. So there are other ways to engage, but it's an opportunity if there is a kind of enough of a cohort of folks that really want to dig in on specific topics and engage in that capacity as a working group.
That's helpful. Yeah, and we're not there yet, I know, but I am thinking a little bit ahead in terms of like, there were some initial conversations long ago, even during the regulation process, or even the formation of the review board, about how are we talking about who and how this work gets done. And obviously, I think people know that I have connections and relationships to many folks that care about worker issues and labor unions specifically. So I think that's one of those groups that I might start to reach out to see if there's any interest, and we'll figure out what the timing is and when that makes the most sense. But I'll start to check back in with some of those groups because they might want to start figuring out a more formal process to give that kind of feedback. And I think some has already been provided. My second comment or question, I guess that's it. I'm obviously eager to get our seats filled, so I'm glad to hear that we have one nomination and that Councilor Coletta will be joining us. And yeah, I appreciate Board Member Lattimore reaching out to folks. I'm doing the same, just to reach out to some of the groups that I know on that list to make sure that they are, if they have questions about it, I can share my perspective from being on the board, and also just encourage them to get those names in as soon as they can. So I think that's it. Thanks so much for your work on this. I will hand it over to Board Member Nelson.
No questions.
Thank you. Board Member O'Malley.
None for me either, other than a quick comment to thank you all again for your great work.
Excellent. All right then. So I think unless are there any other just comments or questions from members of the board before we move on to our next agenda item? Okay. Very good then. So we will move on to agenda item number 3, discussion on our Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. Had a good conversation about this in our last meeting. Going to switch gears because obviously we had the project evaluation form, but we were particularly interested as a board to also get a sense of the application that would be sent out in conjunction. We were interested in sending out both together. So it sounds like our team has done a ton of work to come up with some outline and a draft of that application. And so I'm gonna hand it over to Diana, right?
Yes, I can talk through this section. I should note this is very preliminary. We still have some legal questions that we need to iron out with the legal department. Given that the seeded money is from operational budget versus alternative compliance payments. So we just wanted to be upfront that, you know, this is a preliminary proposal, but wanted to share that because I know in our last meeting, I think there was consensus that it would be more clear to have both the application in addition to the project evaluation form. So for the proposed fund application, the team is proposing utilizing a Google form in which one half would be where we'd be asking applicants to prepare and submit a project proposal outlining, you know, an introduction, a project summary, scope of work, project benefits, budget, project team, letters of support, and any sort of appendices and attachments. And then some additional questions in the Google form, just confirming contact information, organizational information, you know, project name and total amount being requested, and then like a final acknowledgement and accepting of terms and certification of the submitted data. So that's the idea. I'll go a little bit more into what each of those sections would look like. So for the introduction, so in our, I think the way we envision this would be a PDF sort of project proposal where you would have these different sections, and the introduction would include the applicant contact information, name, email, phone number, name of the recipient of the funding. If it's a nonprofit, you know, whether if it has a nonprofit status and its EIN number, organization's annual budget, mission statement, link to organizational website, just to give an idea if it is an organization, what their general work is like. Building information or building owner information, sorry, if it's different from the applicant or organization, so name, email, phone number, and include if they are already a registered vendor with the city of Boston. If you receive grant money from the city, you have to be a vendor with the city. It's just a way to get the money to you. The second section would be a project summary, so overview of the proposed project. So project name, clearly define the problem or opportunity, clearly define the proposed solution, project objectives and outcomes or impacts. If applicable, we'd really like to see any impacts on tenants, description of the buildings being served at the proposed project. So address, neighborhood locations of the buildings, whether they're subject to BERDO, because both buildings that are subject and not subject to BERDO are eligible for funding, and BERDO IDs if they are, and the building's primary use types. For the scope of work, we're asking the project proposal include detailed proposed project tasks, if applicable, any plans to engage and inform tenants, an estimated timeline for the proposed project, so estimated start date and end date, whether the project will be implemented in one phase or in multiple phases, whether the project has already started, and if so, to indicate what phase the project is currently in. Indicate whether the funding would cover the totality of the project or if it would be covering one specific phase of the project. We know larger projects will probably be longer term, so where does this funding fit in that? A list of resources expected to be used for the project, so personnel, facilities and equipment, materials, supplies, any collaborations and partnerships. Include activities that are not included in the funded scope of work, try to avoid scope creep, if you will, and any potential risks and additional considerations. For project benefits, this is kind of where we're explicitly asking folks what their environmental justice benefits are. So of the following list, what do you believe your proposed project would provide? And then of course, the expected emissions reduction. So expected scale and total emissions in kilograms of CO2 equivalent, expected cost for emissions reduction in kilogram of CO2 equivalent per dollar spent from the fund, and then explain a methodology and assumption made. We at the city plan to also provide a methodology just to help folks through this part because we know it's gonna be a little bit complicated. And then for each of the selected environmental justice benefits, provide a narrative description of how your project would meet those benefits. For section 5, we asked for a budget, so the total project cost and breakdown. We at the city will also provide a budget template that we use for our grant making purposes. Detail the total amount being requested from the fund and describe how that funding will be used. Describe other sources of funding being explored, so mass save incentives, IRA incentives, etc. And then organization's annual budget. For section 6, we're asking for a project team overview. So maybe a resume or a CV for each member of the team that's responsible for executing the budget or the proposed project. I'm sorry. And then we have 2 optional sections where we have letters of support. So, if applicable, letters of support from your tenants, if applicable, letters of support from partners and collaborators, maybe technical experts if you've already are in discussion, and other community-based organizations that support your project. And then, of course, just a section to have any relevant appendices or attachments in your project proposal. And then in the Google form itself, we would have additional questions just asking for contact name, title, email, phone number, property owner, if it's not the same with the contact name, organization name, organization address, budget, and 501c status. And just confirming whether you're a Boston supplier and if you're already signed up as a Boston vendor, and if not, just knowing that if you were to get the money, you do have to sign up to be a Boston vendor. Proposed project name, total amount being funded, and then an acknowledgement and accepting of terms and agreement. This was the draft of project evaluation form discussed at our last meeting. Just wanted to highlight the adding of a new column. I believe last meeting there was a request to add a column just to be like need more information or can't quite decide just yet. So wanted to highlight that column also has been added. And so some questions that we thought would be helpful. And maybe folks are already starting to think about this from the board, but obviously would love any feedback on the application or the evaluation form. And also thinking about the types of projects that this year the board is interested in prioritizing to fund, because we currently have a little over $3 million, which is a good chunk of money, but when it comes to building decarbonization is not that much money, I suppose. And so, here on the BERDO team, we're very interested in hearing what the board thinks around for this first year. Is the board more interested in funding maybe like a few larger retrofit projects, or maybe more smaller like planning and scoping projects that may be a little bit on the lower end of the funding scale, or maybe there's some other ideas. I know we're still a bit of ways from opening the fund, but I think those are some of the things that we were thinking about in terms of preparing for the opening. And then lastly, in terms of next steps, if the review board agrees, we feel like there's been a lot of interest in seeing what the application could look like, what the evaluation form looks like. So if the review board agrees, as next steps, we think we can share these preliminary drafts for public input. Have folks share input with us. And if there are any significant changes, we can come back to the review board and present those. Anything or like any feedback, I guess. If there are any significant feedback that would produce significant changes, we could come back to the review board and share those. Yeah, so that was a very quick overview of what we were envisioning, but we'd love to hear any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Diana. Yeah, so we'll do a round of Q&A from the board, maybe 2 if there's enough questions. We will also open it up to public comments and questions as well after that. And I think I'll do what I often do is I just go in reverse order this time. I'll start with you, board member O'Malley, and we'll work our way kind of up the list. Yeah, let's get to the questions and comments from the board members.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and great job. Again, team, this is a very thorough, exhaustive document, and it has to be. This is really important stuff. I remember with Commissioner Brezius and I doing the tour of the BERDO regulations in the summer of 21, and we had said that we had hoped that no fines would ever be allocated because everyone would be in compliance. So this is kind of nice that we've got the commitment from this mayor with already $3 million to help begin to fund what will be some really worthwhile, important projects. A couple of quick questions. Do we have a minimum amount that we will fund?
So currently in the regulations, there is no minimum. The commitment, I guess, that we do have in the regulations is an opening of an application cycle each year.
Yep.
And then in the regulations, we also have written if no project is funded, I want to say 3 or 5 years, that's the environment department and the review board would do active outreach. But there is no minimum like granting amount.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting it should be. I guess I was just more curious about that. And then on one of the earlier slides, it talked about that letters of recommendation will are optional to help bolster an application. I think that makes sense. You know, I know this is a little different than the Community Preservation Act. As I recall, with the CPA, you need you're the district city councilor to support it, either with I don't know if it's as formalized as a letter or what. I remember doing them. And I'm not again suggesting that we do that. I think that we should democratize this as much as possible and make it open. But I wonder if there's something we want to just as a board discuss options that should we receive an absolute onslaught of applications, and I don't know that we will or not. I mean, I think this is a very thorough outline, which sort of shows that these things won't be given willy-nilly. You need to actually show a demonstrated support, and then it will come to the environment department and then the board to discuss and to ultimately ratify. But I wonder if there's any appetite to again, I'm not saying we do this now, but should we see an onslaught of applications, to put some mechanism in place that would allow a more streamlined process. And I don't think that we need to decide that now, but I guess my question is, rather than just talking, is there a mechanism that we could amend the project proposal, you know, at our discretion? In other words, if a year from now we receive a tremendous number of applications and it makes it hard to sort of sift through, that we could then add some safeguards in place. Meaning, you know, mandate a council, or even it could be ONS. It could be the ONS representative at the mayor, you know, or it could be the environment department that gets to sort of give the first pass. I'm kind of agnostic, but I guess that is my question: is if we adopt these sort of regulations, if they go live, and then we need to be nimble and change things 6 months, a year, 2 years from now, are we able to do so?
Yeah, I can jump in and say, yes, certainly, I think the application process could be adapted to certain specific criteria, if the review board wished to do so. I think the application process could be pretty nimble. There are the only, I guess, caveat I would add, there may be certain legal floors that we may need to include. But I think outside of what's written in the regulations and then what's legally required for granting from the city, I think the review board has room to adapt.
Yeah, and that's actually that's perfect. That's what I want to hear. And then I guess, and again, I'm asking this question, and the answer is yes. I assume someone from Corporation Council has reviewed this and will make sure that we're doing everything, you know, correct and living up to the letter and spirit of any municipal guidelines or laws.
Yes, so we are currently in conversation. So we actually have a follow-up meeting next week with council on trying to get the grants live this year.
Great. Okay. Well, that's helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Diana. And that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
All right, thanks, Board Member O'Malley. Board Member Nelson.
Thank you. You know, I'm just thinking down the line as well, when we have many projects to review and approve, trying to come up with some metrics that will help us choose the better projects to utilize the funds. You know, most business people and institutions, they use things such as ROI and hurdle rates and stuff like that to help make decisions on projects. Have we asked for the return on investment to the owner for these projects?
So we haven't funded any projects yet, but in the
No, but
proposed,
in this application, are we asking for them to tell us what the ROI is of the proposed project?
I guess we don't use the term ROI, but we have one section in the benefits section where we ask for the total emissions reduced, and one of the like sub items in that section is one, total emissions from the fund, and then total emissions per dollar from the fund. So a little bit of, seeing what we expect the total emissions reduction will be per dollar, as one of the, I guess, one of the indicators of kind
Okay.
of seeing like the efficiency of that.
Okay, so I was gonna ask if we could have something where we'd ask for how many fund dollars are they requesting per kilogram of CO2 reduced? But it's the inverse of that, I'm hearing, that they would complete. They would tell us how many kilograms of CO2 is reduced per dollar that they're requesting from the fund?
Correct. Mhm.
Okay. So the higher the number, the better the project.
Yeah, I guess, the higher the number, the more reduced per dollar.
Right. Okay. But as far as the return on investment for the applicant, we're not gonna know what their cost savings will be as a result of this project.
That's a good question. Not
Because they're
explicit, I
gonna
guess we don't.
they will save dollars if they implement these. They should anyway.
Yeah, I think currently we don't explicitly ask that.
Okay, well, I would think about that, asking them what their annual savings would be as a result of the project. And then the other thing is competitive bidding or pricing of these projects. How are we making sure that they're getting the best price for the projects?
Yeah, that's a good question. So like if the applicant, like how do we ensure that the applicant is doing a bidding process?
Yeah, due diligence with getting the best price for whatever the project is. It's an energy conservation measure, it's electrification, no matter what it is. I mean, these could be very complicated, involved projects, and you just can't negotiate with your favorite contractor a lot of the times.
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think, we don't have anything written in the regulations that talks about that, but I could envision maybe a condition. A condition for receiving grant money is performing like a competitive bidding process. So the review board has discretion of adding conditions to the money, and I could envision that being something that's required to get the money.
We have to make sure that we're not funding projects that are too costly, or that aren't competitive, in my opinion.
And this is Hannah. Sorry, I just switched to my phone, so hopefully you can hear me. I would just add in that, I think we could consider adding questions like what you're getting at, Jack, to the application form. But I think it would depend on what type. Getting back to the original question that Diana asked, what type of funding we're doing. So if we're putting, an application opening for really targeting construction projects, I think we might want to get more information like that. If we're doing more of like a planning or scoping project, we might consider that bidding process might not be as important. So I think we could consider ways to focus on that, but definitely very open to feedback on things we should consider adding to both the application form, but conditions as well.
Okay, although, I'd like to understand what the savings would be for the owner if they were to implement this project. We do need this metric about the kilograms of CO2 per dollar of equitable emissions funds. I think that's very important. But for construction projects, not studies, but construction projects, I think some type of bidding requirement is important. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Board Member Nelson. I just have, a few comments. I will just say I'm a little challenged by this in that, we have 3.5 million in the fund currently. We have some outstanding questions about, does that all have to be spent right now? How much can we expect to actually have in the fund in the future, right? And so it does feel like this is like I'm almost in my mind kind of treating it like, we got a one shot. I know we'll keep doing it, and I think it could change, right? Given how much is in the fund in the future, so on and so forth. And so I'm just sharing that because I feel like I'm a little bit challenged by answering the question specifically about, the size of the project, the amount. And I will say, I think that that's pretty important on the front end to be able to share. Like this application process seems fairly basic and simple to me in the sense that like a lot of groups that I know who are submitting grants, as an example, are familiar with this type of outline. But one of the things that they, I think, expect in return is clarity on the amount of the range of the grants that would be offered, how they're dispersed, and are there specific reporting requirements, right? And so that's just some things to consider as we kind of go forward in terms of what we release, because I think the more information we're able to provide there, I think that will be helpful to applicants. And I don't have strong feelings about that currently. I'm still kind of kicking it around right now. The types of projects, and I was thinking a little bit about what you were saying, Board Member Nelson, about the conditions piece, right? And I am interested in are there resources that we might be able to provide in the process to applicants around going through a bidding process, around information about what prevailing wages are, these sorts of things that could be useful for anybody who's, trying to weigh and assess a variety of, bids on a project, for example. So I could imagine us linking people to specific resources that might already exist that could be helpful. Otherwise, I think it's a really good start on the application. I'm eager to sort of hear from the legal team because, I do think that's going to be important to understand what if any conditions exist on the dollars, given that some of the 3.5 million, or maybe the majority, right, is coming from the general fund. And so, but given that, I'm almost thinking about this as like, I'm actually comfortable sharing a draft for public comment with the understanding that we actually might do some more tweaks to it and may need to go back to it. So I guess my thinking is we don't have to all get it done on the first go round, that this is something new that we want to get done right. I know it's a challenge and there's a lot of questions that are still kind of hanging out there, but it would be good, I think, to start to get more public comment and feedback on it sooner. And I'm comfortable releasing it. So maybe we can take a kind of straw poll on that later, but we can hear from other board members as well what other questions and comments you all have. So I will stop. Board Member Lattimore.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. It's a pretty thorough and well thought through form. So thank you to the city staff for putting it together. I do have a range of questions, just following up on the thread of kind of, the metrics and, the process, bidding and everything else. I think those are good ideas, but I also think that we should be careful about, layering too many requirements on this, because it could get complicated very quickly. As an affordable housing developer, I know that it's not easy always to, I get bids all the time and competitive bids, so I'm not saying that's not impossible, although we have had some difficulty with that of late. it's very difficult to get contractors in. And I believe that this industry of building decarbonization is very much in demand without enough people to meet that demand. So I think that's something that we need to be thoughtful about, and I understand the point, but also, be practical also at the same time. And also, if this is city monies and not federal dollars, I think this prevailing wage issue that was mentioned is another issue that we want to be careful about, because you can eat up the money very quickly with prevailing wage. There are other ways to, have livable wages and hire folks that, earn a decent living as contractors or tradespeople without doing prevailing wage. So I think we, again, need to be careful about, those things unless we're required by virtue of the source of the funding. I also would want to hear from the attorneys, the city attorneys, around just equity issues related to, we talked about things like, in the past about things like, looking at, the impact on tenants, and rather people can, how we can frame things around MBE, minority business enterprise utilization for assessments for, doing the actual work, et cetera. If that's could be a lens, I don't know what the, if we can do that, but I think that, we need to approach this as much as possible from an equity perspective. I know of my own personal experience in trying to think about decarbonizing my own home, where I went and did a Mass Saves consultation in December of last year to try to do a heat pump, convert from forced hot air gas to heat pump. And I don't know, maybe I did something wrong. They gave me some good information, but when I went to, on last Monday during the holiday, I went to follow up finally on that consultation and went to the Mass Save website, they have a calculator to tell you how much you're going to save. And this issue of savings is something I want to also point out as being careful, particularly as relates to, all levels, tenants, owners. Owners can probably inflate things also, if they're sophisticated enough, unless we give them some real kind of guidance or have a template for that. But for tenants, when I put in the data in that calculator about what it was going to cost me to go from gas-fired furnace to heat pumps, it wasn't about the cost of the actual equipment and the installation, which they had some incentives for. It was about the operational cost. And I did exactly what they said and put in the numbers, how many therms I use, blah, 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 what the cost per therm is, average, blah, 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 blah. It was already pre-populated for the most part anyway. And it came out to almost $2,700 more per year in electric costs. I have to go back and take a look at it again because I was floored. I was like, this is what I've been hearing from my peers in this industry about, electrification, of course, is a great thing. And we want to have better indoor air quality, better outdoor air quality, less emissions. And also having something that factors in, like, not only what you're saving theoretically as an owner, but have you thought about what this might mean for your tenants, and so that to me, especially after this experience, is really important. I've heard folks say over and over again that electrification, yes, has a lot of benefits, without question, and a lot of costs, and people who are low mod income are, going to be left behind, and so I want to think about how we bring some equity in terms of looking at that, if we can, in the application, as well as looking at the, the issues of, what the owner might save. And I'm wondering about savings, to be honest, after that experience I had personally. Not saying this is not a good idea. I'm just using that as an example. And then just wondered quickly about how we're going to help people, again, equity issues. There probably are building owners who are, BERDO eligible building owners who don't have good access to Google Docs, and how are we going to approach that issue with those type of building owners? If folks need help, even putting their applications together, I know there's different forms of help, but again, another equity issue. And then just one last question is the question about the issue I heard you say, Dan, about this is buildings are eligible for this equitable emissions fund, whether they're subject to BERDO or not. Did I understand that? And I didn't think I understood. I don't think so. Can you say more about that? I didn't understand. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, in the regulations, we say buildings like the building carbon abatement project can be on buildings that are subject to BERDO or not. So they can also be buildings that are smaller than 20,000 square feet, for example.
And is there like a minimum amount of square footage, or trying to get as close to the BERDO eligibility as required, or does it not speak to that at all?
Yeah, the regulations doesn't really include that, just like any sort of minimum. I think really it will probably boil down to, you know, when the review board reads the applications and kind of sees what feels like the strongest application. You know, I think it'd probably be more like that would probably be more of like a filter versus like the size of the building. That would be.
I think that's an important factor, because it's possible we'll get all kinds of folks who are submitting. Some of them we might want to help and not be able to. And just, I'm sorry, one final thing about you know, the issue of cost benefit, meaning how many therms, you know, per dollar are you saving, which I think is important. And also what's important is, you know, the issues that we're talking about, the equity issues related to where the request is coming from in terms of what is it in EJ community. I think that it should also be heavily weighted and not kind of unduly, you know, not weighted because of some other higher value somewhere else. So those are my comments, and to the extent that we could think about how to evaluate these things based on these equity principles is what I'm interested in understanding, what is possible, you know, and so that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Board Member Lattimore. Board Member Jacobs.
I don't have any questions at the moment. I'm just taking notes.
Yeah, very good. Board Member Ellis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to go back for a second to the comment made that the city will provide guidance on standardized methods for estimating emissions using i.e. using emission factors. I'm just wondering where you're pulling your sources from, and if it's the same sources that you would be utilizing for reporting. And in certain cases, the emission factors that are related to reporting are not the same with respect to a project. If you're talking about emission factors related to a project or tree planting, emission factors or emission absorption may be different, and those sources may be different, dictating how much, for example, a tree would be absorbing. That's just me using one example. So I just wanted to get a comment on what are your sources that you're intending on using for guidance on emission save?
Yeah, I think so far we only thought about the building, you know, because it's the one requirement, which is the building decarbonization. So we would be using emissions factors that are similar to the ones in reporting. For example, if someone submitted an application and maybe some of the projects included like tree planting, I don't think we currently have we currently weren't thinking or have a thinking on that yet, I guess.
Okay.
They're not assigning it.
I saw Hannah unmute, so I'm waiting. Okay, never mind. I'll keep going. And the next part that I'll admit, I'm gonna say first off, thank you for providing this form, number one. I think it's extremely helpful to have the application alongside what the evaluation will look like. And I also share the same sentiments of the chair. Like, I'm comfortable with this going out to the public to see how they would respond. I think we're coming up with very specific questions here that I wonder how the public would be reacting to making these applications a bit more stringent in the future. One thing that I personally will be curious about, you know, this is pre-process of a project. I'm always interested in the post-process and the outcome. And so I intend to ask you now, like, has there been any thoughts about the verification and evaluation of projects that have been funded, and whether or not they have in fact reduced their emissions, and whether or not they have in fact, if we go the route of a return on investment, which I'm not suggesting we should or shouldn't, but I'm wondering about the evaluation and the verification process.
Yeah, that's a good question. So in some of the like preliminary research that we were doing, we spoke with CPA within the city of Boston and then some other funds for other municipal governments. And I think something that we've thought about is potentially, if it's like a larger project, doing like a phase and having to have like regular check-ins to receive different phasing of funding. So I know CPA does 3 phases where you get like a good chunk first, like as an initial like amount of money, and then you, after certain like regular check-ins, then you get like the bigger second chunk, and then I think there's like a small last third chunk. So that could be a potential approach to this. Also in the ordinance, it is spelled out in the ordinance or the regulations. We have to do an annual disclosure on the fund. So each year we'll have to release an annual report that just lists out what projects got funded, what the deliverables were, and how much money is left in the fund. So in terms of the report itself, we also need to keep in touch with the recipients and make sure that that the deliverables were, if the expected deliverables did occur, and like what kind of savings came out of that. So I think so far it's mostly trying to make sure we keep in touch, and hopefully if we can incentivize that in any way with the funding, hopefully we can ensure that happens.
Okay, I would almost encourage that you have some sort of third-party verification in associations with that, if necessary, depending on the scale of the project. So that's my only suggestion there, depending on the project again. So thank you. Those are my questions and comments for now.
And then just one more thought that came to mind. So, it's also written in the regulations that the review board can prioritize like a certain issue area each application cycle. So, for example, if the first round application, the review board was like, we really actually want to focus on BERDO buildings, the review board could make that call and decide that this first round is really prioritizing, buildings that are 20,000 square feet or larger. Or if the review board was like, we really want to focus on affordable housing, like that could be the theme for the application cycle.
Thank you for that reminder. Now it's causing me to think, if we as a board need to think about, with the upcoming first emissions deadline of 2025, do we want to put out a call for, I don't suspect that immediately within 6 months, or I'm saying 6 months because I think that the turnaround time, I'm just estimating a turnaround time here, that the actual emission impact is going to be immediately noticeable. So it is worthwhile to think about the fact that we have several buildings that are coming up due for a particular emissions compliance. And if we do need to prioritize the larger buildings first, I'm not saying that I'm a fan or not a fan of that. I'm just wondering, with those folks coming in first, is that something that we want to take into account? So thank you for bringing that up, and it's a great reminder.
All right, thanks, Board Member Ellis. I do want to make sure we get to public comments, but before we do that, I will ask the board members once again, and I'll just open-end it. If you have a specific question or comment you'd like to come back to as a member of the review board, let's do that now. So any of you that have on the review board that have any additional questions or comments, if you could just say something or raise your hand or something so we can do one more round. I see you, Board Member Lattimore.
Yes, thank you. I would just want us to, as I was mentioning earlier, really think about the equity issues related to tenants, low-income tenants in particular, as these decarbonization efforts take place, because I think there could be some unintended consequences, and start thinking about how we mitigate those things. So, if not this board, then at least have a way of having the connections to other parts of the city that and just some thoughts and strategies to consider for unintended impacts, particularly for low income tenants. I think that's an area for future additional, discussion and problem solving.
Thank you, Board Member Lattimore. Yeah, that has been sort of an ongoing, at different moments, right? This board has raised questions about what are the impacts on tenants and particularly in affordable housing, and I think that that's something we haven't spent a lot of time coming back to, but I feel like maybe we can dedicate some time in an actual review board meeting to actually going into that a little bit more in detail. One thing I know I'm hearing is the evaluation that we're talking about in terms of the project takes into totality the application that's submitted as well as sort of these measures on the form. And I just wanted to note that it feels to me like the form as it currently exists does not take into account some of the factors that I know board members are weighing. I believe Board Member Lattimore talk about the where matters, right? And I think about that as well quite a bit in terms of where are these dollars going, which neighborhoods, who is going to receive those benefits. And in any case, I think that maybe I missed it, but what I'm suggesting is it feels like the evaluation form is a tool. And the application actually is critically important because it answers some of the other questions that are outstanding, whether it's how much emissions will be reduced and savings, or where and who is involved with the project, I think also matters. So I think it's the two, and I think as long as we make that clear, then that's helpful. The other thing that I will just maybe come back to is, like, I would like to ask members of the board, are any of you sort of hesitant to share this? I think, Diana, you asked this question, maybe it's on slide 22, right? About are we willing to take what we have, given it is a draft and there's all these questions that we've raised, are we willing to share the application outline in its draft form and the evaluation form with the public to accept that kind of input? And I would love to hear from folks if there are any concerns about that or any reason that you do not want to do that. I think a couple of us have spoke to being comfortable with it, but many of us have not. So if you have any concerns about that, I think I would love to know that, and we should try to ideally make a decision about that before. Yeah, go ahead, Board Member Lattimore.
Not so much a concern. I think it's fine with me. I do think, however, that having that type of public process could obviously take time and delay the actual application, deadline for the fund and implementation of the fund. But that would be the only, not a concern, but the only thing to take into account. But otherwise, I'm fine with public comment.
Yeah, I think the timeline does stand out to me as well, Board Member Lattimore, in that I wonder if we'd have to take a couple runs at the draft. I'm just, in my head, given the type of conversation we've had in this board meeting alone, I almost wonder if we're going to have to, hear more from other input, from feedback from the community and other folks, other stakeholders, and then have another shot at the board, kind of taking maybe another look at it, and then I think we have to go through the public review process, right? There is that process that I think is important. So it does mean that this is something we're going to have to spend a lot of time on in the however coming meetings, right, to kind of move this forward. But I think you're right. It's going to take some time, and I don't think my guess is it's not going to be one pass. Any other just concerns about making this available for public comment now? I mean, the only other hesitation I will just share, it goes back to what I was saying about, and others have mentioned about, what's the minimum amount we're granting, or the max amount, what's the range I think applicants can expect, and how will the resources be dispersed, and are there specific reporting requirements? And so that I think, as an applicant, I would think they would want to know the answers before they apply. So that's the only other thing that I feel like there's some outstanding questions that we need to be specific about, maybe before we release it. I want to get input, and I feel like it might be hard for people to give input if they don't have those answers. Do others agree?
Yeah, I agree. You know, we may want to have two applications, one for smaller requests and funds and one for, you know, larger amounts. You know, and for the smaller amounts, we wouldn't have all of the requirements that we're all talking about.
It's interesting.
But you know, if we could get it out there for feedback, that would be helpful for the next go around.
If I can add, Chair, actually, what Board Member Nelson just brought up, we had a conversation with Portland, Oregon's Portland Clean Energy Fund. And that is something they do. They have what they call like mini grants, which I believe they said was about 10,000 or less. It's a lighter lift, and they said it's mostly around scoping a project. So maybe you're in the beginning stages, you're in the planning stages, but that's an approach that they take. If that's helpful context.
Has a cap been specified? As far as the grants go, or is it just kind of like a first come, first serve basis type of thing?
In terms of the applications.
So with the applications, I'm saying, like, let's say if someone was to be approved, like, has a cap been specified, or it doesn't matter? It's just every individual is kind of goes based off, like, is my question making sense?
Yeah. So
Okay.
in the regulations, we don't have any cap necessarily. So applicant could request as much as they deem necessary for their project. That being said, you know, the board could decide, like, you know, we're gonna focus on like maybe like several smaller projects and maybe one large project, and maybe we could decide like what we think the max would be based on the budget that we have currently, like based what's in the fund currently.
Yeah, if I might jump in, I think one idea could be like if the board wanted to have the first application period be, you know, specific around funding smaller scoping projects, so helping people scope out what their decarbonization plans might be. That could be like, we could focus the application and the call for applications to something like that, or the board could choose to have a completely open-ended application period that is, you know, accepting projects that might be, you know, lower than $10,000, you know, scoping projects up to someone requesting $1 million for a deep energy retrofit project. I think that's part of what we're looking to the board's guidance on, is if there's any kind of preference around whether, knowing that this funding is what we have now, the next batch of funding that we can anticipate would be coming in 2026 from alternative compliance payments. So, you know, I think we're looking to the board for your direction on what priorities you have for this first year of funding.
Board Member Ellis, I see your hand, and then Board Member Lattimore, I also see you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I guess I need a point of clarification, because if we're talking about a scoping project, does that still fall in line with the expectation that the project must result in an emission reduction? Because for me, a scoping project, and forgive me, maybe I'm interpreting this wrong, but a scoping project is just, these are the results of what is intended to happen. And so there is not an inherent emission reduction from just scoping. And so does that sort of starts to break the guidelines that we have had set for us from the ordinance. And so I need some guidance on whether or not that's allowed, or if that's appropriate given the parameters that we're working with.
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think that the way that I had been interpreting the requirement for it to be a building decarbonization project is that it could be kind of anywhere along the lines of that. So that could potentially be, you know, funding to get a project, like figure out where to start and how to scope a project that then could be brought to bid, or kind of further down the line, like bringing a fully scoped project that you're just looking for gap funding for. We can definitely take a closer look, but that is how I have been interpreting it. But we can, yeah, follow up on that.
Yes, please do. That must result in direct emissions reduction. That's why I've been having a hard time with even thinking about scoping, excuse me. So thank you, Chair.
Of course, Board Member Ellis. All right, we'll go Board Member Lattimore and then Board Member Jacobs.
But to that point, though, also, if there is a way to, because I think of scoping, particularly from an equity perspective, if there are folks who actually need more help with doing that scoping, which will then lead to the decrease in emissions, I think that still is a connection, I would argue, for within the regs, and then, you know, further determine if those very folks who need support, and we'd be careful on who those folks are that we give support for that kind of planning and assessment, have some potential to actually implement, perhaps with additional support, the actual retrofits that come from the recommendations. Then I think that, to me, I hope that would follow with the regs. So I think it's interpretation. I guess the lawyers will have to do that. But I want to go back to Levette's question, because I wasn't sure if, Levette, you were asking if there are going to be any set-asides, meaning are they going to be like, yeah, do we want to set, you know, not only certain pots of money like the assessment, if we can, versus, you know, actual implementation of decarbonization work, but also set-asides related to like geography, as we've been talking about. Like, we want to set aside a specific amount. We want to, this funders do that all the time. We want to make sure there's equitable distribution of the resources, as we've been talking about. So we want to look at these EJ neighborhoods as, you know, $1 million set aside for that, you know, to start, you know, those type of things. I didn't know if that's what you were getting at, or if it was something else for that.
Yeah, so what I was just initially wondering and listening to both Stephen and you brought along another question. I just wanted to know if there was like a cap set aside. So, you know, certain persons like, all right, well, you can apply for the grant, but this is how much you're allowed to receive versus this person. And then, you know, based off of, is it based off of the square footage of this building, or because this building is bigger, do they get more funding, or is it just like a flat rate type of thing? So that was a question that I had. But listening, you know, to the dialogue progress, I'm hoping that to Stephen's point, I'm hoping that we come to an agreement where it does make more sense for us to focus on you know, distributing funding to buildings that can actually get brought up to speed. So we're not just, you know, I don't want to necessarily saying wasting, but I guess I'll say we can just put the funds to better use where we'll actually be able to see more immediate results. And then, you know, there still should be funding set aside to scope out projects. So when the funding comes for 2026, we can move forward with that as well.
Thank you.
That's all I have to say.
Great, thank you, Board Members. So
maybe we should take a portion of the total funds and put it aside and say this would be for planning and studies, so that owners can you know, begin to move in the direction of decarbonizing and get the design documents done, whatever is needed to complete the work. And then the rest of the funds is for shovel-ready projects that are ready to go, where we can actually see an emissions reduction. Because there are some owners who don't know what to do, and they do need help understanding what to do, and they have to hire the necessary consultants to do so.
I certainly support that.
I agree as well.
I think a takeaway I think we heard from here is like Hannah mentioned, I think we had been interpreting the regulations as scoping projects as being eligible, but like I mentioned earlier, we do have a meeting with council next week, so I'll be sure to bring up this question.
Right.
And I would just ask if there was a way to ask about geographic targeting, meaning set aside for specific, like EJ neighborhoods and that kind of thing. I assume that that's allowed, but don't want to make any assumptions.
Sounds good.
The address is given, so it might be our burden to figure that out, right? If that building is in EJ neighborhood.
There is a definition of EJ. I think we have defined it, what an EJ neighborhood is.
Right, so if they give us the address, we'll be able to figure that out.
Okay, so a ton of really good discussion and questions here. I guess final round, you know, just going back to this one last time. Any strong feelings about whether or not, about not releasing this for public comment, and then I think we will continue the discussion at our next meeting. I would think we're going to have to take this up in our next meeting. Board Member Ellis, I see you raised your hand.
I thank you, Chair. It goes back to your original statement about folks knowing. I think it was you and Board Member Nelson mentioning people knowing the scopes of what they can apply for. So I'm also getting the sense from Diana and Hannah that they kind of want us to tell us, what that scope is, or us to decide that. And that's where I feel like I'm not sure we're answering that part of the question. And so I'm sitting here wondering, this is me throwing it out. Do we want to say 10% of the funding or even 5% of the funding is specifically put aside for scoping related work, provided that the terminology allows for scoping? I'm going to trust that it does, but that's what I'm thinking, that we need to answer that question in order to move forward with being comfortable with putting this out to the public. Again, I'm comfortable putting it out, but I do agree with your question earlier that folks should know what's possible for them.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with, so if it's 10%, that's basically $350,000 that we're talking about. Just going to the actual numbers, Board Member Ellis.
Diana or Hannah, do you have any sense as to what the request might be for funds from building owners? Have you consulted with any building owners who are interested in seeking these funds? And what type, are they talking projects or are they talking studies?
So we have not gone out and solicited feedback from building owners on how they might want to use these funds yet, but I will just share from comparison. Mayor's Office of Housing has funds that they have from ARPA for deep energy retrofits, and some of their projects are like for a large affordable housing deep energy retrofit. They're talking like requesting millions of dollars from that. So that kind of gets to the point of what, I think we could serve a few deep energy retrofit projects that are like construction, closing the fund gaps in construction, or we could fund many more scoping projects or other projects that are helping building owners get to that point. I mean, those examples are from like quite large affordable housing, but I think this is to the point that Gail has been raising of these projects can be very expensive. And so $3 million will not go that far for deep energy retrofit projects. And I'll just also add that I think, I don't think that you all need to answer this question at this meeting or before you can decide if you want to answer it before the application goes out. But I think the way that Diana and I have been thinking about this is that the application outline and evaluation form would be kind of the starting point for opening an application cycle, but the board could then decide to tailor an application cycle to a specific purpose or audience, and adjust the application as needed. So make tweaks as you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. We don't have to necessarily answer the question right now. I lean towards definitely knowing the answer when we release the actual, when it's open, the cycle is open, we need to know the answer then, obviously, I think. In this moment, I think there were people in agreement that we should have multiple pots. And the amount is seemingly the question that we're not certain about yet. And maybe we can think about it and come back with an actual decision. I would suggest in our next meeting. How does that sound to folks?
Sounds good.
I see some thumbs up and heads nodding. And then, does it feel then like we should hold off on releasing this for public until we do that? Or, yeah.
I actually think that you could kind of, as long as you have some of the other issues that you were talking about earlier, Chair, like, is there kind of a range or anything? And reporting requirements generally in there, maybe not even to the final stage, but generally in there, that I think it's okay to put something out there before we, proceed, as you just mentioned.
If we put it out, could we ask for feedback?
I think so, yeah.
What type of projects do you, Mr. Owner, Mrs. Owner, would you seek funding for? Or what type of help would you seek these types of funds for?
And then there'd be a great question to ask in this round, getting feedback on this, but also specifically asking that question. And it's great.
Sorry, I don't know if I have a raise hand function, but I just wanted to confirm. So the idea being kind of also doing a survey in addition to just general public input on the form. I think that could be interesting to see for sure, because we have not explicitly asked that question.
Again, I feel like, I like the survey idea. I also think if we're going to do that, we should put a little bit more thought into the other questions that we might want to be asking. Yeah, I guess, I wonder if we could work with our staff to get a draft of that survey for our next meeting, and then release that along with the form and the outline for the application. So it does mean we would hold off on putting out the form and outline of the application now, until we have it can be a short survey too, I think, but it probably should be. But I think it'd be good to just have some agreement on what that includes. What other questions?
We're so early on in this whole BERDO thing that owners may really be looking for funds. We may have to be more like 25 or 30% so that they can study, figure out what they could do even.
As an affordable house, oh, sorry. Go ahead with that.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, I was definitely in the back of my head, I had a 70-30 split. But that was just me, but go ahead, Gail, sorry.
70 to which side? I'm sorry, to the
70 to just saving 30% for the research and the scoping. That's 70-30. I was thinking that made more sense to me, but I was waiting to brought it up.
Yeah. I hear you. Thank you. As an affordable housing developer, I can tell you, we need a lot of money for scoping. And scoping, we have 1,000+ units of housing, and it's not inexpensive,
Right.
to even do scoping and building assessment type work. So I think we should not underestimate the need for that. But I just wondered about with the additional timing, I'm all for sending this out to the public. I don't have any qualms about that for comment. But wondered about, I heard in the earlier part of Diana's presentation, that we're looking at one of the clarifying or questions, maybe it's not clarifying, questions asked on the reporting has to do with first year of emissions compliance, 2025 versus 2030. I just want to understand that, and how does that play into the timing for getting money on the table to folks? You understand what I'm asking? Or does that have impact for the timing for the use of the emissions fund?
Yeah, was that a question for city
For the
staff?
city, yes.
Yeah. So I would say that it would be very challenging to get the money out the door in time, even this year, to
Mhm.
have a serious impact for building owners that have a 2025 emissions compliance year.
Yeah, I knew we weren't getting out this year. I was just trying to understand when I heard
Right.
that 2025 compliance, I was like, okay, so wow.
So I think one thing could be, I will our goal is to open the application cycle in 2024 and
Right.
start getting the money out the door, but to, actually implement those projects and have an emissions reduction kind of show up, that's going to take time. But building owners could be applying for a short-term hardship compliance plan from the board.
Okay,
That could
right, that's
potentially
right.
be something that like they're
Mhm.
saying, they're doing that and wanting to get funding from the Equitable Emissions Investment
Oh,
Fund. Something like that.
thanks for that reminder. Thank you, of the
Mhm.
hardship compliance plans. I appreciate that. Okay.
The
you.
other piece of just information I wanted to share with the board, because I'm not sure we've shared it recently, is the city has received energy efficiency community, wait, I always get it wrong, EECBG funds, federal funds from the Department of Energy, and we will be using those funds to hire decarbonization advisors to provide some of that planning and scoping to under-resourced BERDO buildings. So there's another pot of funds that is going to support that, but I will say, I think even with that, we're expecting, kind of scoping around like $10,000 per building.
Mhm.
60-ish buildings or so. So we have there is additional need beyond that, I would say.
Just a one quick other question. Beyond the money that's already been allocated to the fund, the $3.5 million, are there any other, and beyond the pay-ins for people who are not in compliance, is the city considering any other funds for this, meaning city or federal, I don't know, funds to capitalize the equitable emission fund now or in going forward?
Yeah, at this time, we don't, I don't have any insight onto whether additional like city operating dollars will be put into the fund. We're certainly looking at other grant opportunities to support BERDO implementation. And we're working on a joint application with the state and Cambridge for some funds that would be able to support BERDO implementation, but nothing that is guaranteed at this point.
Thank you.
All right, I just want to do a quick, so it's 6 o'clock now. I think I know we've lost a lot of our members of the public, but there are a few of you that have stuck with us. I want to make sure we allow some time for public comment and questions. I'm gonna go again and make the recommendation that I think I know there's support for releasing this, but I wonder if we just go ahead and start working on a survey that we can finalize in our next meeting, and then also, any additional thoughts on both the application, the amounts, any other expectations that applicants can have, and then just put that all out together for people to both respond to and give feedback on. So is that okay? I feel like there's just a lot here, and I do want to move quickly, but I also want to make sure yeah, we're just moving with intention and thought here. Okay. So with that, I think I would like to move then, if it's all right, to public comment or public comment period. Thanks for members of the public. I think there are a few of you left for sticking with us. So we're going to go ahead and open the meeting to public comment. As a reminder to members of the public, please, to provide public comment, you can please raise your hand or type in the chat via the Zoom meeting platform. If you're calling in, you can't use that platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. You can also send your questions to staff via BERDO review board at boston.gov. Please be sure to just introduce yourself. If there's a particular neighborhood or organization you represent, we'd love to know that. And I will open it right now. Okay, we may not have any questions or comments, which is also fine. Yeah, and if you all that are with us do have other questions you want to send it in or type in the chat, please do. All right, I think we're going to move on then. Before we wrap up here, are there just any other key, thank you for that comment. Appreciate the robust discussion. Thank you. Yeah, look forward if you are able to provide comment on this, members of the public that are with us, we would love to hear that. We'll get that out to you, I think, shortly after, hopefully, our next meeting here. Any just last questions or comments from members of the board before we move on to the administrative updates, our fourth agenda item? Any need for?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah, go
to
ahead.
be rather quick, I just want to make sure I'm understanding your goal is that the next meeting we discuss like what potential questions we would be surveying the public for, or is there something you want us to do in between that?
No, I think you're right. I think I would even ask, I don't know if Diana or staff are able to even draft something briefly for us. It doesn't have to be extensive. I think it can be a short survey. We can add to that, ask questions about it, finalize, whatever survey we can put out along with the existing application outline and the form. And then the last sort of outstanding question that I think you raised already, Board Member Ellis, is just, how are we actually talking about the amounts, and are there different pots of and maybe that's something we can actually have more of an understanding and agreement on as we release it out for public comment.
Okay, thank you. I'm in support of that. The one thing, Diana, if you can just, or Hannah, if you can just clarify for us, how long is a typical sort of public commenting process? Are we going the traditional formal route, or is this something that, because I'm trying to picture in my head what the timeline looks like for getting through all of this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Oh, sorry, Hannah, did you want to?
You can answer.
I guess initially I thought maybe like 3-4 weeks.
I think there is not a formal, like, this is not adopting regulations. As we said before, this application form can be updated by the board just at a public meeting. So it's kind of up to us and you all to decide. I mean, I think it could be anywhere between 2 and 4 weeks. And I think we would send it out via the newsletters we have and put it on the website for feedback. But it wouldn't be necessarily like a formal public comment period like you would see from the regulations, for example.
Great. Any last comments or questions from members of the board? And then if not, we'll move to our fourth item.
Just really quickly, I would say if we're going to, when we put the application out for comments, I think it would be helpful to give it, 4 weeks, as opposed to less, because I think that's important.
Right, so we have a lot to kind of land on in our next meeting, but again, thanks to the staff for helping answer these questions, give us a ton of great information that I think we need, and then for the board for just all your insightful questions and comments. I think we're going to get there, but it feels like we got more work to do, and we'll do that in our next meeting. All right. So I guess, I don't know if I formally need to close the public comment period, but that's now closed. And we are going to move on to our fourth agenda item. Diana, can you please share some administrative updates that you'd like to cover?
Sure thing. So I just wanted to quickly, I know in our last meeting, there were some questions around open meeting laws and public record. So I wanted to highlight or kind of just refresh some of the open meeting law that we received from the state. So a public meeting like we're doing today right now is generally defined as a deliberation by a public body with respect to any matter within the body's jurisdiction. And so what this really means, or the key takeaway from this, is essentially any public body like the BERDO Review Board, anytime they conduct any sort of deliberation, it has to be conducted in a public meeting setting like we are currently. And so these questions at the bottom are like are guiding questions to ask to help determine if you need to be in a public meeting. So the first one is the communication between or among members of a public body. The BERDO Review Board is a public body. If so, is the communication among a quorum? Currently, we have 7 seated members, soon 9. So currently, the quorum would be 4 members or more. And then does the communication involve a matter within the body's jurisdiction? So examples for the BERDO Review Board would include opinions on applications for flexibility measures or opinions on applications for the fund. If they were like opinions involving like a notice of violation for any sort of like enforcement action. Essentially anything that falls within the jurisdiction of the review board would be considered within the jurisdiction of the body. And then if so, does the communication fall within an exception? We don't really have many exception. I would let the review board know if that were the case. So this means that anytime the review board, if 4 or more folks are communicating, it should be conducted in a very public meeting. And the law is written in a way that includes any medium. So that includes email, social media. It would include like a Google Doc that was shared if people were submitting comments on there and it was more than 4 board members. I think that would also be considered a deliberation. So just wanted to highlight that. And then what's required from a public meeting. So we have to post meetings within at least 48 hours in advance. Here in the Environment Department, we do 10 calendar days just to be really, really thorough with that. We have to create an agenda and allow public attendance. So like if we have members of the public joining us today, and then we have to create and maintain accurate minutes of all the meetings. I know there was also questions around what would be considered public record. I reached out to our legal department and they shared that the state actually hosts a webinar series. So the next one is tomorrow, but there's some other ones throughout the next couple of months that kind of review this in a probably much better detail than I could. So they recommend that, and they also had recommended the frequently asked questions page from the state, and also had some pretty good materials. But they also flagged that if there were more questions beyond what was covered in those webinars, we could send those questions to them and they'd be happy to respond. And I think one other question that came from the last meeting was, if things are submitted to the fund, are those considered public record? So everything that is received to the city is considered public record. There are personal information can be redacted so that personal identifiable information is not considered like public record, but applications generally, so the applications and documents would be considered public record. So someone could submit a request, a FOIA request. So I just wanted to quickly do a refresher on that. And finally, the next meeting we have is tentatively scheduled for March 11th. So that would be the next time we would meet as a review board.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Diana. Circling back on the questions we had about open meeting law and what's public record or not. And then, 2 weeks from today, right? We'll be back.
Maybe 3 weeks, might be.
Yeah,
maybe
it's 3 weeks.
3
All
weeks.
right, 3 weeks. We'll be back. Great. So again, if folks want more detail, you shared the information here in the slides about the webinar series tomorrow. I'm actually going to try to jump on that if I can. And yeah, thanks very much, Diana. All right, I think we are ready to move on to our final piece here, which is very simple. It's our meeting adjournment.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. And we have a second. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Seconded.
Great, thank you. We have a second. All in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Great. Any opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. So the motion passes. Our meeting's adjourned at 6:13 p.m. Thanks again, everyone, for very, very robust discussion, as the chat mentioned. And yeah, our meeting is in 2 weeks. So thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a
Bye.
good one.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.